All right, so this isn't how I would normally record one of my folklore videos, but I don't feel like getting out of bed, so bear with me. Last summer, last July, I posted a video about a conjure beef between Uncle Dinky and Guinea Sam. Now, their Hamilton Burr-esque style duel ended up in the unaliving of one of the men out of St. Louis, but it was only rumored that he actually passed away. Many people thought that he faked his death and went on about his business. Well, this video is going to be more about Uncle Dinky now because he wasn't simply just called Uncle Dinky. As a matter of fact, he was called Dinky, the Goopher King of Missouri, and that was in 1840. Now, this information comes from former enslaved individual William Wells Brown, who escaped slavery and ran to freedom in the North. And this is about his life prior to 1840. And the book is called My Southern Home. But all of his books and his stories, or stories in this book, are written about his life on the plantation in Missouri. Now, Wells says in his book that any plantation with a considerable amount of Negroes always had one who at least claimed to be some type of fortune teller or oracle, and that was this particular plantation, Poplar Farm. And that was Dinky. He says Dinky, a full-blooded African, large in frame, coarse-featured, and claiming to be a descendant of a king in his native land, was the oracle on Poplar Farm. Now, Poplar Farm was a tobacco plantation 10 miles north of St. Louis in Missouri, just so we know exactly where we're talking about. Now, the the plantation itself was owned by a man, Dr. Gaines, and it was known that Dinky had been on this plantation for a while, but ironically, no one ever saw him work. He didn't do anything that he didn't want to do. If he wanted to sleep all day, he'd sleep all day. If he wanted to go into town, he would go into town. Policemen, patrolmen, absolutely no one would stop him. They actually tipped their hats to him. That's how powerful Dinky was. Nobody would bother him, so he was allowed to do whatever he wanted to. But sure enough, he was always at the dinner table whenever it was time for food to be served. Now, there would be an occasion where he'd go out and feed the pigs, tend to the horses, and things like that. But actually seeing him work was something that did not happen too often. Now, it was stated that the black people on the plantation feared Dinky. They knew not to cross him, and whenever they did pass him, about their daily business, they would always be kind and on their best behavior just so they didn't piss him off. Now, here's a fun story. A slave speculator once came along and offered to purchase Dinky. Dr. Gaines, no doubt, thought it was a good opportunity to get the elephant off his hands and accepted the money. A day later, the trader returned the old Negro with threat of lawsuit for damages. A new overseer was employed by Dr. Gaines to take charge of Poplar Farm, and his name was Grove Cook. He was widely known as a man of ability in managing plantations and in raising a large quantity of produce from any given number of hands. Cook was called a hard overseer. Negroes dreaded his coming, and for weeks before his arrival, the overseer's name was on every slave's tongue. Cook came in, he called the Negroes up, men and women, and counted them. He looked over as a purchaser and he looked over them as a purchaser would a drove of cattle that he intended to buy. As he was about to dismiss them, he saw Dinky come out of his cabin. The sharp eye of the overseer was at once on him. "Who was this N-word?" inquired Cook. "That's Dinky," replied Dr. Gaines. "And what is his place?" said the overseer. "Oh, Dinky is a gentleman at large," was the response. "Have you any objection to his working?" "None whatsoever," said Dr. Gaines. "Well, sir," said Cook, "I'll put him to work tomorrow morning." Dinky was called up and counted in. At the roll call the following morning, all answered except the conjurer because, of course, he wasn't there. The overseer asked for Dinky and was informed that he was still asleep. "Well, I'll bring him out of his bed in a hurry," said Cook, as he started towards the Negro's cabin. Dinkie appeared at his door just as the overseer was approaching him. "Follow me to the barn," said the impatient overseer. "I make it a point to whip any N-word the first day that I take charge of a farm, so as to let the hands know who I am. And now, Mr. Dinkie, they will tell me that you have not had your back tanned for many years. And that being the case, I shall give you a flogging that you will never forget. Follow me to the barn." Cook started for the barn, but turned and went into his house to get his whip. At that juncture, Dinkie gave a knowing look to the other slaves who were standing by and said, "If he lays that whip of his finger on me, you'll see the top of that barn come off." Now, as all of this was going on, Dr. Gaines, the plantation's owner, knew Dinkie would be up to something, but he didn't go anywhere near the commotion. He just stood there from his window and watched. So news had spread that Dinkie was about to be whipped by everyone across the plantation, so they all gathered, but not a word was spoken, and I'm paraphrasing, so I ended up having to read the whole thing. 5-10 minutes passed, and the usual sound of "Oh, pray, massa," heard on the occasion of a slave being punished, had not yet rang through the farm, so he wasn't being whipped. Many of the older Negroes gathered around Uncle Ned, who shared a cabin with Dinkie, to ask what was going on. The old slave knew more about the affairs of the conjurer than anyone else. Ned told of how, on the previous night, Dinkie had slept, but it was very little. He closely inspected the snake skin around his neck, the petrified frog and dried lizard in his pockets, and rubbed himself all over with goopher dust. And when he finished, he knelt and said, "Now, good and lovely devil, for more than 20 years I have served you faithfully. Before I got into your service, the white folks bought and sold me and my wife and children, and they whipped me and half-starved me. They treated me mighty bad, and you know that. I used to pray to the Lord, but it did no good. And these white folks don't fear the Lord, but they fears you. And ever since I got in your service, I've been able to do as I please. No whites dare to lay a hand on me, and this is all owing to the power that you give me. Oh, good and lovely devil, please continue that power. A new overseer is on his way here tomorrow, and he wants to get me in his hands. But, dear devil, I ask you to stand by me in my trial in this hour. I'll never desert you as long as I live. Consider this my power. Make me strong in your cause. Make me to be more faithful to you, and let me still be able to conquer my enemies, and I will give you all the glory, and will try to deserve a seat at your right hand." So it's obvious that Dinkie, some years prior to this, had sold his soul to the devil, possibly at a crossroads. So, as Uncle Dinkie was telling everyone this about his power, they all stood in astonishment, because a few minutes later, both Dinkie and the conjurer come walking out side by side. Dinkie and the overseer come walking out side by side. Nothing happened. He wasn't whipped. And that was that. Now, of course, with Uncle Ned being his roommate, he had all the details. And so all of the slaves around the plantation kept asking him what happened in the barn, but he never told. But how do you get a piece of information out of somebody? With some food, of course. So there was a cook named Nancy who gave Ned some crackling bread, and Ned spilled all the tea. So this is the story that he relayed to Nancy. Nancy said when they got to the barn, the overseer said to Dinkie, "Strip yourself. I don't want to tear your clothes with my whip. I'm going to tear your black skin." Then Dinkie told the overseer to look in the east corner of the barn. When the overseer looked, he saw the devil with his cloven feet strutting about. And Dinkie told the man that if he laid a finger on him, the devil would take him away. The overseer was pale in the face and begged them to leave him alone. He told Dinkie he'd never bother him again. And I didn't realize that this was almost going to be a 10-minute video. There is so much more to this. So let me know if you guys want a part 2. I'll be happy to share.